The observation deck hummed with anticipation as Salina adjusted her triocular headset, her mandibles clicking nervously. As the chief xenobiologist for the Galactic Survival Initiative, she had overseen hundreds of planetary adaptation trials, but Kepler 442d was different. The humans called it a Deathworld, a designation that made most civilized species recoil in horror. "All 100 specimens deployed," announced her assistant, a methodical Vreen named Tordix. "Survival monitoring is now active." Salina's compound eyes swept across the holographic displays. 100 of the galaxy's most adaptable species, each dropped alone into different biomes of this savage planet. The experiment was simple: survive 30 standard rotations without technology or die trying. The data would be invaluable for understanding species resilience. "Flag the human subject," Salina commanded. "Humans always provide interesting data." The display zoomed to a temperate coastal region where specimen 47, a human named Caris, had been deposited. Salina remembered his file. Male, 32 Earth years, former military cook turned civilian restaurateur. An odd choice for a survival trial, but the human delegation had insisted. Caris hit the sand hard, the transport beam dissipating above him. He lay there for a moment, cataloging his situation with practiced calm. No equipment, no clothes except basic shorts, an alien sky with 2 moons already visible in the afternoon light. "Well," he muttered, pushing himself up, "I've worked with less." The beach stretched before him, backed by dense jungle. Waves crashed with unfamiliar rhythm. The gravity here was slightly higher than Earth's. He could feel it in his joints, but his body would adapt. Humans always did. First priority, water. Second, shelter. Third, food. By nightfall, Caris had accomplished all 3. A small lean, stood near a freshwater stream, constructed from fallen branches and broad leaves. A fire crackled, started with a hand drill made from dry wood, a skill his grandfather had taught him. And roasting over the flames were 3 pale crustaceans he'd caught in the shallows, their meat smelling surprisingly like crab. He took a bite and smiled. Not bad, needed salt though. "Fascinating," Salina murmured on day 7. Across the observation deck, various species were struggling. The Kralaxian had managed to find shelter but was starving, unable to identify safe foods. The Thorian hunter had plenty of meat but was suffering from dehydration. The Velustrian engineer kept trying to build a signal device instead of focusing on basic needs. And then there was Caris. The human had constructed a permanent shelter, not just a basic survival structure, but something with a door, a window opening, and a fire pit with a stone chimney. He'd woven a fishing net from plant fibers. He'd carved wooden bowls and utensils. He'd even dug a small cistern for water storage. But that wasn't what made Salina's mandibles fall open. "Is he cooking?" Tordix asked, his sensor stalks quivering with confusion. Indeed, Caris stood before his fire, carefully arranging different foods on flat stones. He was humming, a behavior Salina recognized as emotional expression, and appeared to be tasting things, adjusting, combining. "He's not just surviving," Salina said slowly. "He's enjoying himself." By day 15, Caris had established what he thought of as his restaurant by the sea. The shelter had grown into a proper hut with a covered porch area. He discovered that certain tree bark, when dried and ground, created a salt substitute. The purple fruits from the jungle's edge had a tangy, citrus-like quality, and the 6-legged creature that looked like a cross between a chicken and a lizard, delicious when slow roasted with herbs he'd identified as safe. He'd even started plating his meals with aesthetic care, arranging food on his best carved wooden plates with garnishes of edible flowers. "Presentation matters," he said to nobody, channeling every chef he'd ever worked under, "even if it's just for me." But it wouldn't be just for him for long. Orbital scans detect movement converging on the human's location, reported Tortix urgently. "Multiple species. This could be dangerous." Salina leaned forward, her interest piqued. The Galactic Survival Initiative had rules against specimen interaction, but they couldn't prevent it if subjects encountered each other naturally. The planet was large, but not infinite. On screen, she watched as a Kralaxian stumbled into Carissa's camp, clearly malnourished. Then a Velustrian looking exhausted, a Thorian dehydrated and desperate. What happened next would become legendary in xenobiological circles. Cariss looked up from his cooking to find 3 aliens staring at him from the jungle edge. He'd known others were on the planet. The transport ships had been visible during deployment. But seeing them now, clearly struggling, triggered an instinct deeper than survival. Hospitality. "Hey," he called, keeping his voice calm and gesturing to the fire. "You guys hungry?" They didn't speak his language, but hunger was universal. So was the smell of cooking food. Slowly they approached. Cariss portioned out his meal, roasted meat, steamed vegetables, and a fruit compote he'd been experimenting with. He demonstrated eating first, then offered them wooden bowls. The Kralaxian ate with desperate urgency. The Velustrian approached more cautiously, her translator collar finally syncing with his language patterns. "You share food, even in survival trial." "Where I come from," Cariss said, stirring a pot, "feeding people isn't just survival, it's civilization." By day 20, 12 species had found their way to Carissa's restaurant. The human had adapted his cooking to accommodate different biological needs. He'd learned through patient trial and error what each species could safely eat. He'd established a simple rule: anyone who came to eat had to contribute, gathering firewood, catching fish, collecting water, or harvesting plants. It became a community. The Thorian, a natural hunter, brought game. The Velustrian engineer built a better filtration system for water. The Kralaxian, it turned out, had an incredible sense for identifying edible plants. Together, they were thriving. "This violates the experimental protocol," Tortix protested weakly. "No," Salina said, her voice filled with wonder. "This is the data. Watch." On day 30, when the transport beams activated to retrieve the survivors, 47 species had made their way to Carissa's restaurant. 53 had perished in the harsh environment, unable or unwilling to adapt. But those 47 had learned something the Galactic Survival Initiative never anticipated. Humans didn't just survive Deathworlds. They made them home. Cariss stood in the debriefing chamber, facing a panel of confused xenobiologists. Salina sat at the center, her mandibles forming what he'd learned was a smile. "Specimen 47, she began formally. "You were meant to demonstrate individual survival capability." "I did," Cariss replied calmly. "You created a social structure, shared resources, built what you called a restaurant." "Yes, ma'am." "Why?" Salina leaned forward, genuinely curious. "Why would you share precious resources in a survival scenario? Why risk your own life to feed others?" Cariss was quiet for a moment, thinking of his grandfather's kitchen, of culinary school, of every meal he'd ever served. Finally, he smiled. "Because humans learned a long time ago that we're stronger together. And food, real food, prepared with care, it's not just fuel, it's culture, it's comfort, it's how we say you matter without words." He paused. "Besides, eating alone is just surviving. Eating together, that's living." Salina's mandibles clicked rapidly. Laughter Cariss had learned. "The other species," she said, "they describe you as, what is the human word? Crazy. They say only a Deathworlder would build a restaurant in a survival trial." "Probably right," Cariss agreed cheerfully. "And yet," Salina continued, pulling up data streams, "your group had the highest survival rate, the best nutrition, the lowest stress markers. You turned a Deathworld into a community." She stood, all 4 of her arms spreading in a gesture of respect. The Galactic Survival Initiative thanks you for your participation. And, she paused, her translator struggling with emotion, for teaching us that perhaps humans survive Deathworlds not despite their social instincts, but because of them. As Chris left the debriefing, he heard Salina murmur to Tordix, "Make a note in the files. When dropping humans on Deathworlds, expect the unexpected. They might just open a restaurant." Behind him, Chris smiled. He was already planning his next menu. After all, the galaxy was full of hungry people.